Hi, this is Brendan from MORryde, here today to talk to you about the StepAbove with Strut Assist. The StepAbove is a huge upgrade over the traditional RV steps that store underneath the doorway. Those steps are typically wobbly and very steep, which can make getting in and out of the RV difficult. However, the adjustable legs on our steps make them ground stable and rock solid. And we've designed the rise and run to be as close to residential style as possible. Overall, this makes getting in and out of the RV much easier and much safer. For storage, the steps fold into the doorway and the door shuts against it to lock it in place for travel. The heaviest model that we make is the equivalent of lifting about 25 pounds. For some owners that can be a little too much, and so we also offer the strut assisted model seen here. This version has a strut mechanism installed on the inside that counterbalances the step and makes them essentially weightless. Instead of lifting the step, you can easily guide it with just a finger. Starting a few years ago, we also came out with the second generation of step, which came with some new features. Mainly, it has a wider top step, so you have more of a platform as you're entering and exiting the RV. And we also changed how the legs adjust. So instead of having the pin that you pull out to adjust the legs, now it has a ratcheting system that you can pull and it automatically locks as you pull out. To retract it in, you just hit this release button here, and that retracts the legs back in. Let's talk about how to qualify and install one. Before ordering your step, it's important to review our Strut Assist qualification guide. This guide will help ensure that the step is going to be compatible with your RV and to make sure you get one that's going to be the best fit for your doorway. The full guide can be found on our website, but I'm going to go over some of the more important measurements with you now. The first step is going to be measuring the height of the threshold. Now, the best way to take this measurement is by removing the transition strip first. This is the beveled metal piece that sits inside the doorway. To get an accurate reading, we're going to take that off before taking the measurement. Now with that removed, we're going to measure from the floor to the top of the threshold, and we're looking for between 5/8 and 3/4 of an inch. The next measurement is going to be checking the clearance underneath both the doors. This is going to ensure that the door is going to be able to close over the steps once they're installed and deployed. So to do this, we're going to start with the screen door, and we want at least 3/8 of an inch on both doors. So we're good on this one. And typically, if we're gonna have a clearance issue, most of the time it's gonna be on the screen door. That typically sits a little bit lower than the exterior door does. If you don't have the clearance, it doesn't mean that this isn't gonna work. It just means that you might have to do a slight modification. If you have low clearance on the bottom of the door, chances are you have more clearance on the top of the door. And so you can borrow that clearance by taking the door off the hinges. There's typically 3 hinges with 2 screws each. If you remove those screws, you can move the door up in the door frame a little bit and then reattach. That will typically give you the clearance that you need for our steps. On the exterior door, the best way to take the measurement is to almost entirely close the door, and then from the side, check and see how much clearance you have. And again, we have plenty of clearance on this one. Next, we're going to measure the door width. Now, this is the measurement that probably gets most often confused. A lot of times folks will mistakenly measure the frame width or the door itself for that measurement. What we're actually looking for is the narrowest part of the door opening. When the steps are stored, it folds up between these flanges, and so this is the measurement that we're looking for. On this unit, it's coming out to 24 inches, which is perfect because the Strut Assist steps work on door openings that are either 24 inches or 28 inches wide. Now we're going to measure the height to help determine whether we need a 3 or a 4 step for this RV. To do this, we're going to measure from the ground to the top of the threshold. And you want to do this on as level of a surface as possible to make sure it's an accurate measurement. For this unit here, we're measuring at 34 inches. Anything below 36.5, we're going to recommend a 3-step. Above 36.5, we recommend 4 steps. The last part of our qualification is to measure the interior to make sure that you don't have any obstructions that would prevent our strut mechanism from being installed. To the right side as you're facing outside of the door, you need a minimum of 4 inches of clearance. We have just enough on this side. On the left, you don't need quite as much clearance, just 2.5 inches will do, and we've got plenty of space over here. Vertically, we also need to measure and make sure that we have at least 14.25 inch of unobstructed clearance. Now we have this fire extinguisher right here. Fortunately, it's a really easy thing to relocate. Now that you've taken all your measurements and verified that the step is going to work in your RV, refer to our qualification guide's fit chart to figure out what model is going to be the best fit. We're all done on this one, so let's get to the installation. All right, so before we get into the installation, there's a little prep work that we're gonna have to do. Step one is gonna be removing the transition strip, which we already did earlier in the video. The next step is gonna be removing the fire extinguisher so we can relocate that once the steps are installed. And then lastly, for the prep, we need to trim the door trim here. For our brackets, they need to sit flat against the door frame. And so if you have any wood trim like this that's extending out beyond that, we'll have to trim that to the height of our brackets. The easiest way to measure how high to cut your door trim is to take one of these shims here, set it against the floor and against the door trim. Take your utility knife, and we're gonna do that on both sides. All right, so now that we have the door trim marked and we have the fire extinguisher removed, we're gonna cut the door trim to the height that we marked. My favorite way to do this is with a multi-saw like this. All right, so we've got the door trim removed as high as we need to. One thing I wanted to point out on this is that oftentimes the door frame sits back further compared to the wall and leaves that gap. And so that's what these shims are provided for, so that if there is that gap, you can install the shims there so it's a nice flat surface for our step brackets to attach to. Fortunately on this unit though, it is totally flat to the wall, so the shims are not gonna be needed. All right, so we're just about ready to put the steps in the doorway. The last step before we do that though, is we're gonna loosen up these stop brackets. There's 2 bolts that hold each one in, and those stop brackets are what hold the step in place securely for travel when the steps are up and the door is closed. Before lifting this in, I'm gonna loosen those up and push them in so it fits inside the doorway. Once they're in, we're gonna expand them back out so they catch the door frame and then tighten them down. All right, so now when we lift this in place, we're gonna want these brackets to be resting on the inside of the door frame and these stop brackets to be resting on the outside of the door frame. So now we're going to install our first few screws into the floor. Each of the floor brackets has 2 attach points for the screws. Before installing it though, we want to make sure this is centered up inside the doorway and that these wall brackets are tight to the door. We're nice and tight on this side, so I'm going to go ahead and start putting my screw on this one. On this side, we have a little bit of a gap. It wants to pull away here. So you have a few options. What I like to do is take a pair of pliers and just help pull that in. You just want to be careful to make sure that you don't bend your door flange when you do this. All right, so with those 4 screws anchoring the floor plates, we're just gonna fine tune these stop brackets a little bit. This one right here is right up against the door frame and you don't actually want it that tight, otherwise it's gonna rub as you raise and lower the steps. So we're gonna move this out so it has about 1/8 of an inch gap. And same thing on this side. So now that that's done, we're gonna lower the steps and adjust the legs. The best way to adjust the legs is to set the steps so that they're level and that the threshold plate is just touching the threshold here, and then simply pull them out. Now we just have a few screws left to install in the interior. All right, so each side of the door frame is gonna have 4 attach points. You have one here, and then to access the other 2, you're gonna lift this back. There's one at the bottom, and then one closer to the top of the bracket. All right, so we have the strut assist steps now fully installed. The very last step that we have is just reinstalling the fire extinguisher. All right, well that gives you an overview of what the StepAbove with Strut Assist is, how to qualify, and how to install one on your RV. The StepAbove is just one more MORryde product designed to help you enjoy your RV and the RV lifestyle even more.